I saw them bringing two older people whose hands were tied. One was wearing a French beret on his head. They lined them up by the water and forced them to go in. When the water was up to their waist, the men started shooting. People fell down and I became sick from watching it. The river ran red with blood. This is a quote from a Bosnian man. So the conflict we chose was the Bosnian War, and these are some images that kind of depict two major sides of the conflict. So like on the top one, that's like those are Muslims, and they were also the targets of a genocide that was happening during the war as well. And then the military people are Serbians. And then the one right next to the top one of the Muslims are American soldiers from Operation Joint Endeavor.
The people that were fighting during the war, the defending country was Bosnia and Herzegovina, which, well, they were more the ones being prosecuted, the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina, the majority. They were backed by Croatia, and they also had the help of some American supplies and whatnot that was not technically supposed to be there, but was still there anyways, as well as some NATO bombing later in the war. There was the attacking parties. There was the rest of Yugoslavia, which hadn't broken apart yet, as well as Republika Srpska, an independent part that used to be Yugoslavia, and the Serbian Democratic Party from inside of Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Okay, so basic information about the conflict. So it began on April 6th of 1992, and it ended on December 14th of 1995. It took place in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and it included three major ethnic groups: the Bosniaks, which were Bosnian Muslims, Croats, and Serbs. And it was an ethnically rooted war, meaning that the war kept going on because of ethnic reasons, and also there was also religious reasons.
So one of the causes was Josip Broz Tito, who was the former leader of Yugoslavia. He had a bad relationship with the Serbs, which is an ethnic group, since he gave recognition to Muslims of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but not to them, so they felt pretty bad.
Leader with one country, which has two alphabets, 3 languages, 4 religions, 5 nationalities, 6 republics surrounded by 7 neighbors, a country in which lives 8 ethnic minorities. Josip Broz Tito, he thought that everything was going well.
Hey, just pause there so people can read it. Okay, just so you guys have an understanding of how many different groups were in one area. So imagine if you're forcing all these different alphabets, languages, ethnic groups into one area and having them try to get along. It's very difficult. So, and I'll speak, if anybody has a question on why that was, I can speak about it later. Okay, go ahead. Sorry, Norman.
Another cause was the same leader's death on May 4th, 1980. He died of a disease, and that caused communism to kind of fall in the Balkan states. And then another reason was the fact that the Balkan states deeply wanted independence, since they went through years of oppression, and they had a bunch of restrictions, and they saw this as a glimmer of hope.
So the last slide for causes is after the death of their former leader, a new leader rose to power, Slobodan Milosevic, in 1985 was when he rose to power, and he was a leader who deliberately created conflict between the Serbians, the Croatians, and the Muslim Bosnians. These ethnic tensions caused the war, and he was nicknamed the Butcher of the Balkans because he led many massacres and killings of the different groups.
So these are our moves. We Are Better is in the perspective of the Serbians, since they wanted a greater Serbia, because they thought that they were higher than everyone else. And then another one, 2 others, is No Control and I Engage, which is in the perspective of the population of Yugoslavia, since they had to act on things they most likely felt they had no control over, as if they were trapped or caged. And then the last 2 is They're Dead and I'm Fearing for My Life, which is the people of Bosnia, since right after this war, they were victims of genocide.
Hey guys, can you go back to that? Sorry. Do you guys see how they did their fame? It's actually kind of cool. I've never seen it done this way, but I kind of like that. like instead of trying to relay or rely on the information on the slides, it's really cool to see it that way because I think we understand it better if you see that. So I took a picture of it because I might make people do it that way next year. Sorry, go.
As for the timeline and a general overview of at least some of the brief events of the war. On March 1st, 1992, Bosnia declared independence in opposition to the Serbian minority, which, as I mentioned earlier, were the Serbian Democratic Party. And 2 days after independence was recognized by the UN, which wasn't immediate, but it took like less than a month, or it took a bit. It took a few months, but right after the UN recognized their independence, the Serbs attacked the city of Sarajevo, which was the capital for all of the Bosniaks and the country as a whole. Here we have a picture of Sarajevo in 1993. It was just almost completely destroyed, bombed out shells. And people were still living there because they had no way to leave. The area was at siege, so they couldn't just walk out and leave. On April 16th, 1994, the UN designated Srebrenica as a safe haven because there weren't really any safe havens in the area. However, it was very short-staffed and did not have enough people, leading to the village of Srebrenica being assaulted, and over 8,000 men and children were 8,000 men were killed. Women and children were bussed away, and it was the deadliest single event of the entire war. Operation Jordan Endeavor ended most of the fighting in the region at around that time. Here's an image of Srebrenica, which can't really be seen, but it's just a mass grave, and people are stacked in there. It looks like they were plastic. It looks like they were people that were melted together and just didn't have any other place to go.
Okay, so statistics and data. So there were an estimated 100,000 deaths, 80% of these deaths being Bosniaks because, like I said before, there was a genocide that was happening during the war, so, and the Bosniaks were the targeted civilians. And then there were 2 million displaced, and 60% of the civilians that were involved in the conflict or had seen developed some form of PTSD from what they had seen or experienced. And then we have a video.
This was on our balcony back at home. We left on a bus with a number of other refugee families. The bus was pulled over by some army, and all of the men were ordered to get off. So I was with my dad, my mom, and my brother. And so all of the men started getting, started saying goodbye to their families and had to get off the bus. I thought, that was the last time I was going to see my dad. However, the bus driver said that for his long journey, he is required to have someone to switch off with. And so he said that my dad was the other bus driver and that they had to take turns. So my dad was the only man who got to stay on the bus, which I think is hard for him too. But my family stayed as a unit.
It puts in perspective what people felt, because if you were just driving on the road, you had the chance of just losing your father. If your brother was old enough, you could just lose them. You could lose your own life if you were ordered off the bus. As for the leaders, the people that were really behind the entire thing, for Bosnia and Herzegovina, Alicia Izvetko, he was the president, and he declared independence, which was the main reason that the war started in the first place. He did manage to acquire 51% of the land in the region in the Dayton Accords, which ended the war, and Herzegovina was the prime minister of the country as well. As for Isperska, the main opposition party, the leader was Radovan Karadzic, who was the president, and he led the Serbian Democratic Party while he was in Bosnia, and when he no longer was, he was in the Srpska. He worked towards the genocide. That was one of his main goals. He was charged with life in prison for a whole lot of war crimes and a lot of crimes against humanity.
So these are our attitudes. Why won't they recognize me? Which is in the perspective of the Serbians, since as we said before, they felt like they got no recognition from the former president. And the other one, which is unvilified when needed, is among the troops, since they were willing to strike if needed and they were ready to assert themselves. And the last one is why are they killing us? Which is like citizens of Bosnia, since the genocide.
For the actual leaders of the war instead of the political side. Savor Helevic was the chief of staff for the army in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and he trained for 5 years before that, and served as the major general for most of the war. He was brought up on the war crime of killing civilians, but was found innocent. The war was not won without a whole lot of war crimes on every side. As for Republika Srpska, Ratko Mladic was the leader of that. I have a video on that, but he was the commander, and he was a brutal man. He killed people basically for sport. He was sentenced to life in prison for war crimes, thank goodness, but he was one of the biggest forces behind the Bosnian genocide. Behind it, still continuing once it got rolling.
Okay, so through the mood for the Bosnian War, so we have anger, sad, agony, fear, and hatred. And the Bosniaks probably felt all these things. At one point or another, they were probably angry and also sad and had hatred towards the Serbians. And they probably also felt fear because of that and agony. And then the Serbians, they felt most likely anger and hatred towards the Muslims because they wanted their own greater Serbia, just of them. And then moral of Americans. So soldiers, there were 20,000 soldiers deported for Operation Joint Endeavor, which the goal was to bring peace and end the war. And thank goodness there was 0 American casualties.
So role of Americans, government officials, they had little to no influence, but they did try to support the Bosniaks by arming them, which didn't work out that they weren't able to do this.
Citizens overall had pretty small roles. It wasn't really a war that was in the eye of the public, though it definitely should have been. Nothing really notable, aside from journalists over in the area.
So these are our emotions, anger and defeat, which is in the perspective of the Serbians, since they didn't win the war, so they can't really back to it like a bunch of those. And freedom and independence, which is the perspective of the people who were fighting this war, since that is the whole reason why they were fighting, for the people. And then the last one is withdrawal, which is people on the Balkan states, since they still really want it.
The impact on Americans, there was more than $1.5 billion spent for economic aid by Americans just in an attempt to help support the Bosniaks from the internal genocide that they were facing. That was between 1991 and 2004. There was an increase in spending in the U.S. population, just it comes with the war, just the general trends of a slow war like that. As for the impact on the Bosnians, there were massive ramifications on the social and cultural infrastructures as well as the physical. Buildings were destroyed, railroads just gone. They had very little, there was very little foreign aid to do help on the ground. There a whole lot of the country's economic capabilities were left, and the war still has after effects to this day. It wasn't all that long a war ago, but that was all that long ago a war, but that was 20 years ago. They still feel a whole lot from it. These were some of the pictures that just seemed to really show what people felt. The the Bosnian Serbs and the people that were causing genocide, they felt happy about it. They had no, well, they may have had a conscience and kind of felt as if it was wrong. They didn't. They did it because they felt like it was what needed to be done. There were bodies in the street, blood stains just throughout the area. It was an incredibly bloody war with a lot of civilian casualties. There were soldiers, there were child soldiers, and just
Okay. So this is a quote about genocide from Dr. Robert J. Lifton. So-called ethnic cleansing signifies mass killing, mass relocation, and that does not consist of genocide. So, like I said before, there was a genocide going on during the war, the Bosnian genocide, and it was located in Srebrenica and Zepa, and it started in April of 1992, right when the war started, and the perpetrators, the Army of Republika Srpska, and that was the Bosnian Serb army, and then the target were the Bosnian civilians. The motives, so Serbs wanted Greater Serbia, which was basically just a country made up only of Serbians, and also the idea of Islamophobia, which basically, so the Serbians were Christians, and then the Bosniaks were Muslims, so there were religious conflicts between those two groups.
Ovo je bila Vrantiskova. Ja sam otprilike ovo ne ležao. Ja sam ležao ono. Vidiš gljiva, puna mrtvi. Ustaneš. Šta smo ovo bila glavnica? Obišao sam pored nje i ošao.
Mevludin survived by playing dead among the corpses, and at night he escaped over the mountains to government territory.
Ova zemlja je puna krvi.
The people that were, the Bosniaks had no real escape from what was happening unless they got really lucky. Thousands, hundreds were killed, sinking just at once.
Okay, so the whole reason that we chose the Bosnian War is because I have a relative that was serving in Operation Joint Endeavor, and that's what I'm very proud of right here. So he's just gonna kind of talk about his experience and such, and if you guys have any questions too, you can ask that. So.
You want to slide his chair over maybe, or if you want to walk around, you can too if you want.
Do you want the chair? Okay.
In November of 1995, I was ready to get out of the military. I'd spent 25 years in the military. In that particular month, I had a secret briefing in regards to this very event. It said that we would be sending a unit over to support the troops that were going to Bosnia. We were going there as a peacekeeping group, and I was told that I would be going in the second group, and I had a choice at that time. I had been in the military, as I said, 25 years, and I had a choice at that time. I could have retired, and I chose not to because I had been part of the military for the very thing that I'm being asked to do at that point in time. I'd been in since 1970, and this was 1995. So we went over, and I thought I was going to spend my 8 months of active duty in beautiful downtown Kaiserslautern, Germany, and I was sent to a place called Tisar, Hungary. Tisar, Hungary is where these troops, the troops of 20,000 that they talked about there, and they mentioned, would be mustered to go into Bosnia. And they were a peacekeeping troop. Nobody was fired at, nobody was shot at, nobody was, I never had to worry that I feared for my life. But I went once a month down to Croatia, to Bratislav, not Bratislav, but Croatia, and I would visit our troops that were there. And they were the last stepping off place before the troops went into Bosnia. And we had what were called fire bases in Bosnia, where they made sure that those people who had genocide committed against them, that they could now move back into their homes and restore their homes. And one of the most interesting things that I had the privilege of seeing while I was a part of this group was every month that I would go to Croatia, I would see people rebuilding their homes. I would see them reliving their lives and going back to what was their homes and having a chance to start over again. One of the most interesting things that I noticed while I was in Croatia is that most of the homes have been destroyed. They weren't destroyed by bombs, they weren't destroyed by troops in the sense that we would see with artillery. They were destroyed by, these homes were heated with gas, and they would take candles and they'd take them to the second floor of the home, and then they would turn the gas on and let the gas burn up until it reached the candle, and then the homes would explode. So what I got to see was people and materials of this being rebuilt. And all that was being done because we as U.S. soldiers were the peacekeeping, along with many other different troops from NATO and from, it was a United Nations effort to restore the peace there. So we made it possible to make that happen. Every soldier, when he puts the uniform on, says, wherever my country sends me, I will go. And I had worn the uniform at that point for 25 years. And Nora's father was a senior in high school that year that I went. So I sacrificed by going, but they sacrificed by me being home. When I left on July the 11th, 1976, which happened to be my 20th anniversary of being married to the lady sitting over there. When I asked her, and I did ask her, do you want me to retire or do you think I should go? I didn't tell her my decision. My decision was I thought I should go. It was also hers. You send a message to your children. If you don't go, you send a message that something's not important. Where we live and how we live and how we support other people's freedoms is important. Always has been. What's interesting is Sarajevo is where World War I got started. And I have a grandpa who fought in World War I because of that war starting in Sarajevo. And it's interesting that 50 years, 70 years later, 80 years later, I'm in the same area because of the same city and the same things that are happening. And I'm proud to be a part of the United States Army and be a part of our military. And I retired after I came back, and I was in 27 years. And I was in because of, believe it or not, Vietnam. In 1966, Vietnam had already started, and I knew that if I was going to have to go in and serve in Vietnam, I wanted to be an officer, so I went through ROTC to become an officer, and spent that 25 years. And what's interesting today is a reservist or a National Guard person has much more of a chance to be involved in a conflict than I ever had. I was in 25 years, and the first time I was ever mobilized was right at the end of my career. We weren't called like that, like they are today. I'll open up for questions, and if you want any questions from the lady here who was a part of all that that was happening, because every time somebody goes off to serve, children and spouses are left behind to take care of what's going on at home, and it's not easy for them. It's actually easier for the person that's involved in the conflict, because that person has a job and he doesn't have to deal with the everyday life. So it's easy for them. It's not fun getting shot at a conflict, but or having that possibility. But I never faced that, so I'm not like others. I have a lot of pride in the people that went before me that served in those conflicts. And there has been somebody in my family in the military since 1968. There's been somebody in uniform since 1968. I have a son-in-law who's in uniform now and serves out at Fort Meade. Anybody have any questions?
Anybody have any questions yet? Go ahead, Camry.
Okay, so both these that are ridiculous. Like, what was your most traumatizing experience?
Being away from the family. We were not. What was interesting is where I was, and I was in Hungary at Tsar. I was locked on the base. I wasn't allowed off the base. I was not allowed to go out unless there was 10 people all going to the same place. And you had to let them know 24 hours in advance, and you had to wear your uniform. So you could not go out in civilian clothes. You had to wear your uniform. The most freeing thing that I had happen to me while I was there, since I was not allowed off what they call the cantonment area, was on Christmas Eve of 1996. They permitted us to go to a Christian service, a church service, and I was allowed to go off the base, and instead of going down, there was a contract office I could go down to and eat, which was like 2 blocks off the base and come back, but that's all they could do. I was allowed to go off the base, turn left, and go down to this church and watch a Christmas Eve service, and it was such an exhilarating experience to be, so to speak, not locked up in. I mean, I went over to protect other people's freedoms, and then I was locked on the base and not allowed to go anywhere. So my job was to see that the troops that were downrange had what they needed. The troops that were in Bosnia had what they needed, and that's what I did in Hungary. And I was at a Russian military MiG base that belonged to Russia just probably 3 or 4 years before I got there. And it was an amazing thing. And so I was outside where I worked. There was 3 Russian MiGs that were on stands that decorated the front of the building. And the building I was in was the building that when President Clinton came to visit, that was his headquarters, and I worked in the office where his headquarters were. I wasn't there when he was there, but that's the space I was in. Any other questions?
Did guys that were coming back and forth, since you said you were there to support the troops that were in Bosnia and so forth, did a lot of them talk about any of the genocide that they saw, or any of the things that they witnessed, or things like that?
By the time we got there, I had a West Point graduate who worked for me. He went down right after we were allowed to go in. And they talked about how they went between the people that had military equipment and so forth. But we didn't see, we came to stop the genocide, so we didn't see the genocide that was going on. We were there for that particular purpose, to stop it from continuing and to permit healing. When I talked about Sarajevo, healing doesn't occur until people are willing to get along. And Sarajevo, in 1914, in August of 1914 is when World War I started, and it was basically for the very same reasons that genocide was going on back in the early 90s. So until we're willing to accept each other's what we do and what we believe, this will continue.
And Mr. Summers made a statement, and you juniors or seniors should know the answer. Does anybody know what started World War I in Sarajevo? I know you learned this in American Studies. I know it.
You're not that far into the year.
How about seniors? Anybody?
Just did the Constitution. They killed somebody around.
Okay, it was the Archduke.
Archduke Ferdinand.
Yep, the Archduke was actually, and I have a cool way to remember this, so when we get to it in about 2 or 3 weeks, you'll never forget, because I actually had a group of kids recreate the idea as if the start of World War I was a bar fight. Okay, and so the Archduke was actually killed, Franz Ferdinand, okay, was shot, and it kind of stemmed this huge conflict, and it was all about, and you can kind of see it up there. I tried to do it by map form, but you can see the 1919 one, that's after World War I. So look at what the difference is between 1919 and 1992, because Mr. Summers was there, 96 you said? Okay?
96, 97.
Yeah, so anybody see a difference in the map?
We got smaller and smaller.
Okay, can somebody tell me what they see as a difference? And I don't care if you pick 1919 versus 1946, but this might help you a little bit understand why he was there as a peacekeeping effort.
Because it was new territories?
What's that?
New territories?
Yeah, so if you look at 1919, you just created one border for all, and you called it the Kingdom of Serbia, Croatia, and I think it was Yugoslavia, or Slovenia, sorry, Slovenia. And so then eventually they were like, no, we'll just call it Yugoslavia. And we'll just jam all these people in it, and y'all are ruled by one person, and that person could be Slovenian, it could be Croatian, it could be Bosnian, it could be any of those groups. But if you're in power in a country and you're let's say you're in control and you're of a certain ethnicity, what are people going to assume? That you're only thinking one way. Okay, so then obviously people get upset about that, and then in 1946, after, anybody know what? Because we haven't got here either, so if you don't know, I'm okay with that, because we haven't talked about it yet. But did anybody know why 1946 there's a map that's separate from 1919? What happened right before 1946?
A war.
Oh my gosh, it's called World War II. Okay, World War II happened, and so then what happened to the territory? Somebody say it got separated. So what they separated in? Chunks. What were the chunks represented by? What?
Borders.
I get that. Why were the borders created? To separate people. So, okay, Croatians, you're going to live here. And Slovenians, you're going to live here. Bosnians, you get this spot. Okay? So everybody was moved. Okay, here, what would be the issue? Give me some issues that would happen, because this will relate to why he was there. Nikki?
If I heard you correctly, it would create the divide because nobody really sees each other, but they all hear of each other.
Okay, there's one. Give me something else. Oh, okay, Camry said maybe families were separated. Maybe you were Bosnian, but you lived in a Croatian area. And you actually like living there because you have grown up there, and they start to tell you, hey, whoa, you shouldn't be here. You should be with the Bosnians, right? So that's another good one. Go ahead.
They felt like they were being treated less than each other?
Yeah, maybe. So you see why his efforts, I know his service is just as important as somebody that was on the front line. Because if you read in any kind of conflict, the biggest issue is how we end it. And how it's ended between people. Because if I hate Percy hates me, I don't hate you. Okay, don't hate you. But if I hated Percy and Percy hated me, and Sophia came in to try to peacekeep in between us, she can only do so much. right? And you said it, how did you, I forget how you just said it. You said you can't tell people how to act. You can't tell people they have to get along. So how do you think, okay, ready? Because this is a military question. Did they train you for those peacekeeping events that would happen? Did they prep you for those things? Or did they kind of fly by the seat of the
No, they
pants?
didn't prep us.
Okay.
No, we just went in, they gave a brief history. I was a history major, so the brief history was not something that I didn't realize what was going on. But they gave a brief history. Now, what was interesting, we had agreed that only a certain number of troops could go in there. And that was the 20,000 number. So what they did was they took what we would call combat troops that went in there, and they took what would be normally people who would be cooks and supply and so forth, and they hired civilians for those jobs, so that the number of peacekeeping troops that required combat could go in there and be a bigger presence, because otherwise, typically, when you send 20,000 troops in and you're supporting them, you're going to send 3 or 4 times that number of troops, because the other support is doing those type of things. So we sent troops in to be a presence, and the U.S.'s presence anywhere is going to be important. It's going to be much more likely that the mission's going to be a success than if the troops are not there. So because our whole power is behind it. So it was an experience that I found interesting. I had the privilege, because I was there, to see what the former blocks of the Soviet Union were. And I got to see how people were, and they were fascinated with us because we were new in the area. They're fascinated with us because here's these U.S. troops. And I had an interesting experience because I went to see the Pope. I was in Győr, Hungary, which is not Bosnia, but